This is the first time that a comprehensive study of the teachings of Pir Vilayat Inayat has been made in one seminar. Working on this teaching for now over 2 years and a half, working on my book on this teaching, and I must say that I'm so overwhelmed by the greatness of it and by the richness of it that sometimes I feel, well, this is just too much and this is just too great. I don't know how to cope with something so great, shattered by it. Then I feel that it was given in the course of inspiration, in the course of, all the hardships that Hazrat Pir Vilayat had to go through, traveling from one place to another. I know something about it. It was necessary for someone to come along and draw the essence from the different aspects of the teaching and build it up together, you see, and then it's very, very powerful. It's something so powerful, absolutely overwhelming. Well, in short, Master teaches us how to have insight into beings, how to understand situations, how to unfold our being, the potentialities in our being, how to see from a different point of view than the usual point of view from which we try to look upon things. In fact, how to see things from the divine point of view. Imagine that you were looking at a play and you could only see one part of the play. He teaches one how to overcome one's despondency, one's grudges. He teaches one how to develop mastery over oneself, and as a consequence, of course, over circumstances. He teaches one how to raise one's spirit high, how to attune oneself to the harmony of the spheres. He teaches one how to enter into the consciousness of other beings. He teaches one how to see the whole of one's life in its real meaningfulness, and also in the context of the nature of existence, like incarnation and reincarnation, and the influence of all the spheres that are contingent to the physical one, and which are just as important, and in which we are immersed in the same way as we are involved in the physical plane, but which we are most times unaware of. He teaches one how to develop magnetism, to know how to hold it and how to communicate it. He teaches one how to reach illumination, how to become light, how to become conscious of light, how to work with the different chakras, how to be creative and express our creativity by unfolding our being on one hand, and on the other hand by giving something to humanity in the form of art or music or drama or sculpture or whatever. Well, here are some of the subjects listed, and I just hope, as I say, that we'll be able to cover them all. Renunciation and achievement, metaphysics, incarnation, reincarnation, death, resurrection. The practices generally all about religion, faith, prayer, symbolism, the unfoldment of our personality, realization, revelation, intuition, inspiration, all about the angelic spheres, the jinn spheres, about spiritism and obsession, breath, then something about the history of the Sufi movement, relationship, morals, ego, dreams, vision, light, body, mind, heart, soul, spirit, the use of the wazifa and the fikr, the hierarchy of the masters, prophets, saints, and the spirit of guidance, love, sex, brotherhood, mastery, law, reason, truth, the art of speaking, concentration, contemplation, meditation, the message, I'm just reading it as they appear in the program, consciousness, intelligence, will, spiritism, suggestion, telepathy, sound, music, space, atmosphere, vibrations, developing the chakras, how to train in the spiritual field, particularly for leaders, the different stages that one goes through in one's unfoldment: mysticism, emotion, ecstasy, initiation. The different elements: magnetism, healing, creativity, art, sculpture, architecture, poetry, drama, and then the zikr, and then the link with the teacher. As you see, this covers a tremendous field. I have divided up the subjects in different categories. I hope most of the time you will feel the presence of Hazrat Inayat Khan behind all of this teaching, because, well, you know how thousands of people are going to India trying to find a teacher, trying to find, well, it's trying to find their ideal inner person, because people are not satisfied with thoughts. They want reality. Being, that is what is important. To find a being before whom you can feel reverence, a being who is the embodiment of your ideal, who is the epitome of divine power, whose magnetism unfolds you, whose atmosphere permeates your being, whose joy quickens your spirit, and whose peace puts you at ease with yourself. I know many of us would like to sometimes get so disappointed with life that they wish to retire somewhere. They would like to go into the high mountains and watch the sunrise or the sunset, or feel the wind on their skin, and the sun, and the beautiful mountain lakes, and the deer in the forests. And it corresponds to a kind of nostalgia that corresponds to a great need in the human being. But all of this and more one can find in a being, wherever he is, in the middle of the crowd. And that being can embody much more of what one is looking for than the most beautiful things in nature. That's how we should be. And if we're not so, well, we become so. That is what we're supposed to be. They're looking for it in another being, and we're supposed to be it ourselves. Well, Hazrat Inayat Khan, as a young boy, of course, when he was a very young boy, 8 or 9, I think, he used to go and was very intrigued by the presence of the sannyasins and dervishes who used to congregate around, I think it was a grave around Mullah Bakhsh house. I went to Mullah Bakhsh house, the house of the grandfather of Pir Inayat Khan, some years ago, and I noticed that there was a grave of a Sufi not very far away. And according to the customs that are still prevailing nowadays, the holy men, sannyasins, dervishes, and so on, tend to meet at those graves, and it's a wonderful meeting. They seem to be enthralled by each other's presence. They greet each other like kings, and they just speak things that don't seem to make sense to most people. And sometimes little children congregate around there, but and sometimes, of course, they have ceremonies and all kinds of things. Hazrat Inayat Khan used to go there and spend all of his time there. And he learned to appreciate and value these people and to get into their souls. Later on, when he was about 15, he was taken by his uncle to a great congress of music in Nepal, and I expect he got rather tired of all the pomp of the court and rode his horse in the neighboring country, and he felt a very strong atmosphere coming from some part of nature. And when he looked round there, he saw a great rishi, and he said the whole neighboring nature seemed to be full of the atmosphere of this rishi. that every leaf of the tree seemed to be enthralled by the presence of this rishi. And as he approached him, he found that it was a muni who didn't speak. It was, it was law of silence. He'd made a vow of silence. And all that was said was that something was exchanged by the meeting of the glance. The glance plays, of course, especially in the case of a rishi, of a silent teacher, they call it a muni, the glance plays a very, very important role as a communication from soul to soul. Now there are many others, of course, who, one in particular, I think more than one, who presaged that Hazrat Inayat Khan would become a very great teacher. And one said, you have no idea what the greatness of the mission that he has to bring forth. Hazrat Inayat Khan said that what makes these teachers have tremendous insight is their peacefulness and is their mastery. And now we must, if we wish to develop insight and mastery, we have to know how we can still our minds and our consciousness, and how we can develop that quality of the sannyasin which makes for intuition. Hazrat Inayat Khan speaks about this dervish who was walking the streets in Hyderabad with a bottle of wine in one hand and a glass in the other. We don't know what was in the bottle, of course. But anyway, he looked as though he was quite drunk, and there were massive children following him. And he would turn to people in the street and say, you there, and he would tell them all about themselves, and another person he would tell them all about themselves. And Hazrat Inayat Khan sent his servant to ask him if he would come to his house, and he would sing to him. So he came, and then there were a lot of people gathered around, and to each one, the dervish said exactly all about themselves. How did he know? Because he'd lost himself. Imagine that you're walking in the street and you've just lost yourself. You don't know who you are. You don't know what you are. You don't know what you're doing. But because you don't know who you are or what you're doing, you know all about everybody else. Well, that's a secret. Now, I don't know just exactly if you can go about your jobs if you lose yourself to that extent. Maybe one can. Maybe that's what one is supposed to do. Maybe one might even be more efficient. I don't know. But I imagine that one would be much more efficient if one could see deeply into the hearts of beings. And one could see deeply the reason why things happen the way they do. Well, this is what it's all about. How can we manage our lives unless we see clearly? That's why we're desperately looking for guidance. Just imagine you're involved in life for whatever span your life is, which is not very long, and one is always making mistakes and always doing the wrong thing, and one doesn't know how one should turn, and one is looking for guidance, and it's difficult for the teacher to tell you what to do because you're supposed to do it yourself, and you're supposed to take the decision upon yourself. And of course, in extreme cases, he has to. Like, for example, if a child is going to run across the street, you have to stop him. So sometimes the teacher has to say, don't do this or do this. And then bring you to the point when you are able to see it yourself. Well, you see, it all starts by this sensitivity, which I'm sure that some of you have. And I'm sure that we all control that sensitivity, like one feels like the deer in the forest that wants to run away. I'm sure you feel that sometimes, don't you? Like the harshness and the brashness of people tends to wound you. says, he shows the nature of the deer which runs away at the flutter of a leaf, for becomes sensitive and convinced of the disappointing results that come from the limitation and changeableness of life in the world. Hurt within, he becomes sensitive, and the first thing that occurs to him is to fly, to hide somewhere, to go into a cave in the mountains or in the forest, where he will meet no one. And then as he progresses, he becomes like the snake, who develops tremendous wisdom, and then as he develops further, he becomes like a lion. Now that's an extraordinary thing. Those of you who have gone on a retreat probably know how you feel. At first you feel highly sensitive, and you begin to perceive things which you hadn't perceived before, and you become intuitive. And then you begin to experience the reality behind the physical reality, and the whole world seems to be rather strange, rather unreal. And then when you see people, it appears that you feel the harshness of the egos, and you feel their selfishness, and you feel their lack of understanding. And then afterwards you begin to become much wiser, and you begin to see behind the thinking of people, see why they think the way they do, and then you can accept them better. And then there comes a time that you become so strong. It's very extraordinary, but you started by being so weak, so fragile, and now you become so strong. Through your wisdom, you become so strong and through your love, because now you can love people because you understand them. Now, Hazrat Inayat Khan gives us quite a few indications as to how one can develop this sensitivity. How are the meditative souls awakened? How do they experience the inner life? In the first place, the adept values his object of attaining the inner life more than anything else, more than wealth, position, rank, or anything else. You see, now if you want to develop this kind of intuition that we're talking about, that's the first thing. Whatever you're doing in life, it has its value, but, of course, a spiritual life has the greatest value for you. And then seclusion, silence, thoughtfulness, meditation, and gentleness, all these make the rhythm of one's life appropriate for receiving inspiration, revelation, communion. So later on, you can have this intuition when you're in the midst of the crowd. But to start with, you really have to withdraw. And also, one has to know how to withdraw while one is in the middle of the crowd. In the middle of action, how to, let's say, surround yourselves with a zone of silence. Be full of love and goodwill and energy and enthusiasm and so on, in one sense. And in the other sense, know how to withdraw within the depth of your being. Otherwise you become very superficial. You become just like a piece of cork floating on the surface of the water. It gives you depth, you see. If you have this deep connection with inside yourself, it gives you great depth in the middle of life. Then a person begins to communicate with all things and all beings. Wherever his glance falls, on nature, on characters, he reads their history. He sees their future. Every person he meets, before he has spoken one word with him, he begins to communicate with his soul. Before he is asked any question, the soul begins to tell its history. Every person and every object stands before him as an open book. Now, this is what we have to aim at. And this is something that you can practice all the time. You're speaking to people, you're sitting facing someone whom you don't know. You come in, somebody gives you a present. And you get right into the person and right into the object, and that person becomes like an open book to you. Well, how do you do it? By this seclusion and silence, and then by the desire to communicate with all beings. You see, it's very strange, because on one hand you withdraw in yourself, and on the other hand you communicate with all beings. You withdraw away from the surface, and then you communicate with all beings at a higher level. And this, we'll be talking about this later on, of course. We must learn in our meditation how to communicate with beings in their soul rather than in their human individual consciousness. Of course, naturally, Hazrat Inayat Khan embodied all the teachings of the rishis whom he met, and he himself was continually answering unwritten questions or unspoken questions, of course. In the biography, for example, there's a lady who said, I attended his lectures, there were problems in my mind and I was looking for an answer. I did not have to wait till after the lecture to ask my questions, for during the lecture he answered all of them, looking at me all the while. And then there's another lady who said, one day Murshid asked me if I would like to work for him. I said, I should love to, but I'm not free, because I have a sister who's living with me. And Murshid answered, you will be free. After a few months, my sister married and I was free. Some months passed, then Murshid came to Holland again, and as soon as he saw me, he said, you are free. I had not let him know before. I asked him, and then there was a lady who had this dream, and Murshid asked her in the dream, are you prepared to give all your time to the spreading of the message? And when she met the Murshid the next day, he said to her, what is the answer of my question? Some dervishes have become very, very unpleasant because there's so much curiosity. People just go there and by pure curiosity, and they need to have peace and seclusion, and so sometimes their ways of getting rid of people are a little bit brash, I would say. They can really insult people, and I remember one dervish who really threw stones at me. Well, so this man, so the friends of Hazrat Inayat Khan asked him to go and see this dervish, and they were wondering how he would treat Hazrat Inayat Khan. And he stood up and treated him with the greatest respect, and he treated his friends again with the greatest contempt, just as everybody is. Of course, obviously behind this, the whole teaching of Hazrat Inayat Khan was his life, and you can't teach what you haven't actually practiced yourself. Of course, there was a tremendous giving up, and in this case, what he did renounce was renunciation. because, of course, he was longing for the solitude. You feel that in the plays, perhaps. You know, some of the plays like The Bogeyman, in which when the ascetic comes, the guru comes, he longs for nature, and there he finds himself in nature again. Wilderness, my dearest friend, why did I leave you? Why did I leave you? Though I had left you, still you were always in my heart. Though I longed to be in the solitude, yet I never felt I was away from you. And then in The Living Dead at the end, the Maharaja offers his kingdom to his son Puran, who had been cast away, who had been banished, unfairly of course, and the latter replies, no father, I am going in search of another kingdom. And in the other play, the faithful trustee, that is called, actually it is the life of Muhammad. Amin, who portrays Muhammad, says, "Home is a world. The life outside home is the underworld, but this wilderness is my paradise. I feel myself only when I am by myself. It is then that I look at the whole world as an onlooker. There must be some reason why I'm attracted to this spot. There are many reasons, but how many can be explained? The heavy responsibility of home and the continual struggle with the outside world, smallness of human character, the ever-changing nature of life, the falsehood that exists in life, the generality, the absence of justice and the lack of wisdom. All these and many other things make life unbearable for me. Besides the ever-jarring influences coming from all round, it is only here, away from the continual turmoil of life in the world, that I find some rest. And yet, I wonder if my heart is really at rest." And you see, that's the challenge, you see. Can you really be at rest, you see? No, my heart cannot really be rested. If I am here away from the world and my fellow men are in the midst of the turmoil, it cannot give me the peace I want. I must seek God myself first before I speak of goodness to my fellow men. And where shall I find him? If it is found anywhere, it is here in the solitude where my soul feels free. And then, having heard the divine beloved's gentle whisper through the fluttering of the breeze and the cooling of the wind and the fluttering of the leaves, he realizes that he is not only to be found in the wilderness. Beloved God, where art thou not present? Thou art everywhere. That many of us go through, we are longing for the solitude, and then we find that, after all, we cannot find peace in the solitude. As I said, there's a challenge in Hazrat Inayat Khan's teaching. As I said, there's a challenge in Hazrat Inayat Khan's teaching. There is no doubt about it that those who have been able to retire in the solitude have developed qualities which we admire, which we would like to develop ourselves, and which would help us in life. But however, it seems that it seems a mistake to withdraw from life in order to seek liberation for oneself, because surely life must make sense. If practicing renunciation as a principle were a good thing, there would seem to be no purpose behind the whole creation. Why are the eyes given if not to appreciate all that is beautiful? Why are the ears given if one may not enjoy music? Why has one been sent onto the earth if one cannot look at the earth for fear of being called materialistic? Those who make spirituality out to be something like this make a bogeyman of God, something frightening. In fact, spirituality is the fullness of life. If someone asks me if the hermit's life is ideal, I would say it may be ideal for him, but you need not follow it. The Sufi makes no restrictions and has no principles of renunciation, nor does he teach renunciation. The yogi says it is better to leave the world, but the Sufi chooses a life in the world with renunciation. The Sufi has no need to run away from the world, for he has recognized and sees the face of his beloved, the face of God, everywhere. So, what then is the purpose of those who are living as ascetics and sannyasins? And he says, such people are the ones who make experiments of life by the sacrifice of all the joy and pleasure that the earth can give. And when one may ask, yes, is it possible to accumulate these two things, the way of the ascetic and the way of the world? The answer is that mastery is greater than seership, because the master both sees and accomplishes. Yet, one must admit that indifference gives us still greater power than action. And why is the power of indifference greater than action? And that is because although a motive has a power, yet at the same time the motive limits one's power. Now, we come to a very, very important point, and that is to know how to find the power that develops in us as we unfold in our lives. Because everything is achieved through power. There's power in indifference, there is power in action. You just have to, you can experience this yourself on a retreat. You can experience the tremendous power that you develop by withdrawing from the world, by renouncing what you want. Like, for example, if you want to eat and you don't eat, and you want to sleep and you don't sleep. Anything that you want and you don't do it, you develop tremendous power. On the other hand, motive gives power. For example, you want to accomplish a certain thing. Now, it may be building a house, for example. Well, it gives you power. Tackling this problem gives you power. And if you just sit back and don't do anything, you can never get that power that you get through. What is it? It is allowing the desire of God to work through you. You see, Hazrat Inayat Khan attaches very much importance to desire, whereas in a lot of teachings you learn desirelessness. And here, and that, of course, desirelessness is, or detachment, vairagya, as they say in the East, of course, is the way of the sannyasin. It is the way of the one, the renunciate, the one who leaves the world. But if life is important, then it isn't just detachment that will give us power. It is understanding that the whole of life is the expression of the desire of the Creator. And that's very strong in Sufism. And the word that is used is ishq, which translated by nostalgia, the nostalgia of the Creator. And we experience that nostalgia every time that an impulse grows in us. And of course, I know that you will answer right away and you'll say, well, how can you mean to say that every impulse is a divine impulse? And how about the impulse of a criminal? Well, even destruction is a divine impulse. If you want to build a house on a ruin, you have to first destroy the ruin. Or, if it weren't for the destruction of our lives, of our bodies, we would never progress. Life evolves at the cost of the destruction of everything that becomes fossilized in time. In fact, the destruction of Prakriti. But when an impulse passes through the limitation of a being, then of course it may be deviated from its original purpose. And that is a misappropriation of desire. So you can't say that desire is bad of itself. What is bad is the way in which we take the divine impulse and use it in our limited understanding, instead of respecting it in the vastness of the divine intention. So Hazrat Inayat Khan always says it is the first thing that man must do in life is to achieve. And to achieve, you have to experience the welling up of the desire of God in you. All of this wonderful creation that has been built up through the incentive and sacrifice of human beings is an expression of the divine. One could say that God, having created man, continues to create through man. Hazrat Inayat Khan always says art is the continuation of the divine creation. And so the most material things, like as I said, building a house or whatever, making a business, achieving something, is important. How important is it? Well, its ultimate importance is because by achieving, you unfold your being. And by unfolding your being, you come to realization. And by coming to realization, you be. In fact, these are the 4 stages. Achieve, unfold, realize, be. It's very important to know these 4 stages. So, first achieve. And remember that when achieving, you are giving expression to an impulse in you. And what is that impulse? It's generally a feeling of wanting to perfect conditions, to improve conditions. It's our sense of perfection, which is hurt by seeing how imperfect things are. And we want to improve things. This is where we measure our mettle against the resistance of conditions and situations and people and so on. And this is where we exercise mastery. Now, unless you have actually achieved something, you cannot unfold the potentialities in your being. There, all this richness in your being, all these bountiful qualities, and they don't have a chance of manifesting until you have to call them into action by your achievement. On the other hand, what we want to do is to try to introduce renunciation into action, because if you, for example, if you build a house and then you are satisfied by that, by what you achieved and lived in the house, well, you would be smaller than your achievement. But supposing that you spent all 20 years building a house or whatever, gaining enough money to build a house or whatever it was, and that having achieved it, you gave it up and you made it a home for retarded children, yeah, then you would be really great. Yeah, that would really make you would become very great as a being. Your whole personality would become so great because you have had the strength to achieve, and then you have given it up. But supposing that you think, oh, what's the point in all of this hard work? I just want to sit back and play the guitar. Well, it's not worth it, you know. It's why does one have to work so hard to have a little comfort, a little convenience? It's not worth the while. I don't think it's worthwhile. Well, you've missed something. It's like the musician, for example, who feels, he'd rather live in a little pokey room somewhere, that as long as he can follow his inspiration. And he might feel he might complain that he's just not, that he's sacrificing so much for his music, and perhaps it might be better if he starts by playing in a nightclub and making a little money, and then realizes just what a sacrifice it is, and then he can give up his comfort and live in a little room and compose. It is better to first do something very that really exerts all your effort, and then when it comes to reaping the benefit of it, then you give it up. This is where renunciation can be seen as a flight of stairs, says Hazrat Inayat Khan, by which to rise above all things. For all things of this world that man thinks he possesses, he does not really possess. In reality, he is possessed by them, be it wealth or property or a friend or position or rank. Yes, how does one proceed then in order to achieve? The first thing one has to do is to choose an object, select an object. Now one has to be very wise in selecting the object, because once one has selected the object, one must pursue it. Even if one finds later on that one could have chosen a better object, one must be careful not to choose an object that is greater than one's capacity. Like, for example, I remember there was a young man who came to me in despair once, and he said, well, I'm just making a hash of my life. I wanted to be a writer, but I don't seem to be able to make good. And I said, well, why do you try so high? Why don't you try something more within your reach? And he said, well, that's what I want to do. I said, well, yes, but why not choose something like, what have you done before? Well, he said, well, I was a photographer. I said, well, be a good photographer. And then once you have really achieved it, then you can give it up, and then you can be, perhaps you will start writing. But in your present condition, obviously you haven't made good. You haven't been able to do it. So don't choose something which is beyond your reach. On the other hand, do not feel humiliated by a purpose which you feel is below your capacity. For example, you're washing up in a cafe or something like that. That's your job. Okay, well, if you do it well, remember that it is what you achieve in your being that is important rather than the job itself. But remember that when you have achieved your job, whatever it is, like in an office, for example, you've taken a job in an office, and when you really have mastered it, you've got that job under control, now you can give it up. But first, even if you feel that it's a job you could do better, never mind. You do this job. You've decided upon it, and once you've decided upon it, you do it. You make good, but once you feel, well, I've got this in hand, I've got this together now, give it up. Now I know that some of you will come to me later on and say, look, I followed your advice, and now I don't have a job. Well, if you want to go further, that's the time that you have to renounce. It's when you've got it together. Not before. Not before. Like, before it's what they call sour grapes, like, you feel there's no purpose in picking them, they're probably sour. No, first of all, try it out. But if, for example, you decide that, having made the effort, you decide that it's not as valuable as you thought, then you give it up. In fact, our progress in life consists in our scale of values. Like, for example, the little girl might be so enamored with her dolls that she can't sleep without her dolls. And when she grows up, she throws away her dolls. And so it is with us. We are continually progressing by valuing things which we hadn't valued before the same way, and depreciating things which we had valued before. That's the way we progress. This is, of course, our consideration in whatever we do. Ultimately, we are faced with a choice in life. We're always faced with a choice in life. Shall we give up this and do this, or should I still do this, or shall I marry this person, or should I marry that person, or should I maintain this friendship, or should I give up this friendship? There are always decisions that we have to do, and in every case, we are faced with an assessment of the values at stake here. How can we assess the values of things? Things are valuable according to the way we see them. Hazrat Inayat Khan says that the value of all things that we consider precious or not precious is according to the way we look at them. For one person, the renunciation of a penny is too much. For another, that of everything he possesses is nothing. Renunciation depends upon the evolution of the soul. In fact, renunciation is the mark of the evolution of the soul. For those who develop spiritually, all things are easy to renounce. Toys so precious to children mean nothing to the grown-up. Perhaps that which seems to be the greatest value to the worldly seems man is nothing to the one who has renounced. So what Murshid says really is, only renounce something that you don't value anymore. At least that's what he says here. Now, of course, sometimes there's a conflict because we have to. There are two things which we value, both of them, and we might be faced with a situation in which we cannot have both. You cannot have your cake and eat it. You have to give something up, and we value the thing that we're giving up, but we value perhaps still more, hopefully, the thing for which we are giving up the other thing. It says, for example, where in order to gain silver coins one has to lose the copper ones, one must learn to lose them. Now this is very important for us, because if we cling to something which we value, and there's something else that we value more, and we don't have the courage to sacrifice the thing that we cling to, that we value, and we get stuck in life. And many of us, I think, are really stuck in life because of this, because of the inability to renounce. And this is where renunciation will make us more effective in action. Because if you're in a job, for example, that you have got together, and you don't have the power to renounce it for something greater, something that you value more, then you're stuck in that job. And it ends up by despondency and feeling of having not made good in life. For example, imagine someone who he's got a good job, and he's really, he's got it together, and everything is fine, and yet he feels, well, is this my purpose in life? And then, well, he would like to perhaps learn something about plants, or learn something about music, or do something with people, or with children, or something that really makes sense of life. And that means that he has to give up that job. That's a well-paid job. Well, then, right, well, that's it. He may value the things that he has to give up. So one doesn't say that one depreciates them altogether, but they have a less, one must give up something that one feels has a less value for that which one is giving it up for. You see, ultimately, it's a matter of realization. Everyone stands in life according to his degree of realization. You make your life or mar your life according to your realization. And you're there right in the middle of the challenge of life. At every moment you have a choice. Emerson says, beware of what you do or you wish, because it might materialize. Imagine that you think afterwards, isn't it good that I didn't have what I wanted then? Now, in fact, you see that later on, but in fact it's possible that you have what you wanted, and then later on you regret it. It's all a matter of realization. And so you see how important spiritual realization is in the middle of our lives. It is the secret of the whole thing. On the other hand, you see that just withdrawing from it all and looking at it all is not good enough, because you cannot know the value of things without testing them. You can criticize people having material things, but what do you know of that, of what it means, unless you yourself have these material things? It's easy for the ascetics who've never had anything and who give up, let's say, living in a poor village, and they give it up and they go and live in the woods and live on the berries and the roots of the trees. Right, but there were cases of some monks, Buddhist monks from Ceylon, who came to Paris, and they got themselves very involved in the nightclub life. Yes, because they hadn't really tested themselves. They didn't know what it was to live fully in life. It's better to live fully in life. But having done so, don't let yourself be bogged in by it. That's what Satanatra says. It says, by renunciation man becomes wiser, and by being wise he becomes more capable of renunciation. There's nothing valuable except what we value in life. And a man is fully justified in renouncing all that he has, or that may be offered to him, for the sake of that which he values, even if it be that he values it only for this moment. For there will never be a thing which he will value always in the same way. Which means that you might give up something for something that you value at that particular time. And you might realize at the time that what you value at the time is perhaps a passing whim. And yet at the time, that's the thing that is the most valuable. And so it is important, because it's valuable to you then. You have to do it. But then there might come a time when you have overcome the thing that you gave up everything else for. Of course, ultimately, in one's decisions, one is being tested in that as to whether one's heart is on earth or in heaven. The whole thing is that, you see, we think of ourselves, we close ourselves up in our little problems and say, well, what shall I do? And so on. You see, we're right caught up in a little cell. We don't realize that there's all of these beings up there who are all planning it all for us and are testing us. And we think that we're making the decisions and they're really testing us. Hazrat Inayat Khan opens up this wide perspective, and all of a sudden you understand now. You understand what it's all about. Whereas if you're just considering the thing in the ivory tower of your understanding, you get into a kind of panic. What am I going to do? What should I do? You know, me. You see, you get caught up in your own life, and when you see the tremendous values that we come across in our lives, we're exposed to in our lives, every human being, the whole human drama is open to every human being. You know, in your love, in your despair, in your hopes, in your encounters with beings of all kinds, in your idealism, in your material needs, and in all, you're coming across, well, the whole gamut of life. This is where one is tested. You know, you have a family and you have a house and a car and a good job and friends and then you think, well, is that what it's all about? And you hear of Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and there she is picking up people who are dying on this road in Calcutta and helping them to die. And you think, well, you know, what's the point in my life? I'm doing all the right things, you know. And what does it amount to? What's the net result, you know? And then one day I'll die, and what is the net result of it all? It's just very superficial, right? What have I really achieved? Well, maybe it's part of a great wheel and so on, but well, ultimately, the physical well-being on the earth is important in as much as it is the materialization of realization. In as much, but if you get bogged into it, but then of course you miss the point altogether. What is then the end, the purpose? What is the purpose? That's the great question. What is the purpose of our lives? To reach realization. That's the purpose of it all. That a human being should, let's say a fragment of the total being, should reach the realization that the total being has of all things. The greatest thing that can ever happen, that a cell of your body should realize what you realize of your body. It's the greatest thing. That's what it's all about. And so how do we proceed? All right, well, we have to start achieving. Why do we have to start achieving? Because by achieving, we unfold potentialities in our being, and by unfolding these potentialities, we begin to realize the divine perfection. We begin to realize the whole game, we see the whole thing before our eyes being enacted. Of course, our individual lives, in as much as we can talk of individual lives, of course, only make sense in the context of an overall purpose. And so, of course, our decisions at first will be made in the limitation of our understanding. As we evolve, we shall learn to give up what seems to be our individual interest for an overall interest, for, let's say, a greater interest, a cosmic interest. And that's where a person becomes really cosmic. And otherwise, he's a little man, you know, he just follows his ego and things, and he's a little man. And the great man, the great being, has become absolutely cosmic. And that's, of course, what you feel. That the reason why you go and seek for a rishi or a holy man. What is it? It's because you feel the vastness of his consciousness. And somehow it makes sense to you. Somehow the limitation of one's ego weighs down upon one. One feels so fed up with oneself. The tyranny of the self weighs upon one and comes across the vastness of a being. And what does it mean? It means that he sees a wide purpose behind all things. And you come and you see towards him, and you see the narrow purpose of your own vision. And his vision opens the frontiers of your being, and you begin to see vast. That's the influence of a master upon a disciple. That's what it is. And so you are considering, for example, you come to a teacher and ask, what about your problems, what you're supposed to do? And he sees the overall purpose. Maybe he can't bring it to you because of the limits of your conception of things, because everyone is a horizon. According to the Sufis, the limitation of the being is his horizon. That means as far as he can see. That's his limitation. And so the teacher is trying to bring the vastness into that limitation. So of course, you will, in order to accommodate this vastness, your horizon will have to extend. That's what happens. And so he brings to you the purpose behind the purpose of your life. An overall purpose. How can we explain this a little more clearly? I'll give you an example. Supposing it's taken from the example of a musician. Supposing a man is a cellist in an orchestra, and he's a good cellist, and maybe he realizes that his playing contributes towards the success of the performance, because the whole orchestra depends upon the whole orchestra depends upon the perfection of each instrumentalist. Well, he sees his purpose, which is playing the cello, but then he sees a higher purpose, which is the good of the orchestra. And, well, perhaps presumably that's as far as he goes. But supposing that, like Pablo Casals, for example, he should give up playing the cello and start to compose. Now, in order to be able to compose, he will have to experience something of the meaning of life. He'll have to bring into his composition something of the vastness of the drama in the heavens, or let's say the cosmic drama enacted on the earth. He has to develop a greater vastness to be able to compose than to play his part in playing the cello in the orchestra. This is an example of how behind one purpose there's another purpose that is vaster still, and behind that purpose there's a still vaster purpose. And so the Hazrat Inayat Khan teaches one to continually see a purpose behind a purpose. That is, continually examine your purpose in view of a wider purpose. So whatever you're doing, like for example, as I say, you're washing dishes, or you're in a business or whatever. See the purpose of that business, right? It's not good enough just to say, well, this is my business, and then I'm going to meditate in the evening. It's just two drawers. One opens up one drawer and closes it and opens up another. No. Now, what part does this business play in, let's say, in life? And so if you can see, yes, by this business now I'm developing perseverance, I'm developing fortitude, I'm developing insight into people. A business, well, you're dealing with people, right? I am helping people. I'm showing are you showing compassion to people? Do you see how this business is working in the whole of society, how it contributes towards well-being? Does it really contribute to well-being? Are you, and then see all that you can bring into it, right? And all right, well, then you realize, well, you do the maximum that you can within that action, and then you find that, well, that I've outgrown my business now. There are other people who can do it just as well. I give it over to them, and now I feel I must do something else. That's because you have been looking at seeking for an overall purpose behind your individual purpose. You see, it's quite a different thing to meditating on the absolute, and then getting back into the job again. But this is a meditation that you can conduct continually, while you're involved in your action. And of course, you can do it every day. I would say at the end of the daily meditation, just stop everything and examine your lives from the point of view of an overall purpose. It's a practice that you should do every day. You'll notice that the vaster purpose is so vast that it seems a little bit in the mist. It's so vast. The individual purpose seems to be clearer because it's closer. But as one develops vastness of consciousness, the wider purpose appears clearer and clearer. And that's what makes the greatness of the master, is that he sees the overall purpose very clearly. And when we read about it in the teachings of Hazrat Inayat Khan, much of it is the view of the one who's at the top of the mountain, it seems like words to the one who has not experienced it, like God consciousness. It's like it's a wonderful thought, and until it becomes a reality, and when you actually experience yourself as being the expression of the divine consciousness, then of course it's a reality. And that's why, as I said, the wide horizon is a little bit misty, like, of course, when you're looking in the distance, you can't see quite as clearly as when you have it right near, but then it's just like you have a telescope that enables you to see it all very clearly. Yes, so then I spoke about the word desire that enters very strongly in the teaching of Hazrat Inayat Khan when he says, let thy wish become a desire. It is the interest of the Creator that has made this creation. There is no impulse which in its beginning is wrong or purposeless or out of harmony, for in the sum total of all things every impulse has its purpose. It is during the process through which the impulse passes that it becomes right or wrong, but not at the beginning or at the end, for the beginning has a purpose and the end has answered the demand. Every desire you accomplish is one step further towards that final goal which every soul ultimately has to reach. If you tell yourself you do not desire anything, you go back. This whole creation is the result of desire. The purpose of creation, therefore, must be the fulfillment of this desire. Thus, the first step towards accomplishment or attainment, whether it be spiritual or worldly, will also be to proceed with purpose towards the goal of your desire. And that's why Moshe says, indifference is attained by developing interest, and by developing discrimination in one's interest. Indifference is attained by developing interest and then by developing discrimination in one's interest. You see, at first one values a lot of things, like the children value their toys and things like that, but when one develops discrimination in one's interest, then one develops indifference.